Welcome to Speculative Sandbox, your audio playground for creative storytellers. My name is Vickie Lan, and in each episode, I and a guest will unpack a trope with an eye for world building, character development, or narrative structures. You can also join the conversation on TikTok and Instagram. For those times when the real world just doesn't cut it, let's get lost in a fictional one.
My name is Avitus B. Carle, and this is How We Survive, originally published in Lost Balloon, and also available in my flash fiction collection, These Warm Bodies, out of Moon City Press. How We Survive. We survive on vegetables from gardens we make in the backyards of strangers, blasting music with all the windows open, raiding closets, setting food bowls on porches just in case our tabby, Rottweiler, ferret, hamster, or goldfish comes home. We are the last people on Earth. You say this every night before you go to your room, and I go to mine in a house that was never ours. We survive on secrets. Over breakfast, I admit that sometimes I wish you'd come to my room. You say you wish you'd known sooner, that you've met someone and wasn't sure when to tell me. I try to remember all the times we've been apart, wonder how you managed to meet someone when we are the last people on Earth. I want you to meet her, you say, and I nod because I don't know what else to do. We survive on a series of miscommunications. You take me to the nearby sex shop and tell me her name's Lorraine. I look for evidence of another human, someone I could be friends with, someone I could envy, address hateful letters to that I'll never send but burn in a fire pit while you sleep. Someone I could have rebound sex with to stop pretending like you and I have ever had sex. I start building a life with this woman you've named Lorraine. You walk to the display window. I take a moment to admire your ass and think maybe I have a chance, and carry a mannequin towards me. Meet Lorraine, you say. We survive on fuck ups and moments of doubts. Like, how did I fuck up this badly? How did you fuck up Lorraine? Lorraine has blue hair and eyes that never shut. She's wearing a black latex catsuit that accentuates her hips and legs in a way I can't hate and is made of fucking plaster. Don't embarrass me, you hiss. I shake her hand. Nice to meet you, I say, while thinking about all the things I didn't do that drove you to Lorraine. We survive on privacy. Lorraine starts coming home with you after we meet, and I hear you two through the walls. You tell her about your life before we were the last people on Earth and everyone you miss. I hear you two having sex when I'm trying to sleep. Sometimes I hear my door creak open and think you've come to apologize. Instead, I see Lorraine leaning in the door frame, naked and frozen in her shop window pose. We survive on new experiences. You ask me to move out. Say it's nothing personal, just that you and Lorraine need your privacy. I consider telling you about Lorraine in my doorway, but you're babbling about how new everything is with her. You hear birds singing, there are none. Music playing, you keep rickrolling me, and everything is so much brighter. It's not. It's not because since we're the last people on Earth, everything is still the same. We survive on small moments. Since being evicted, I've decided to house hop. I want to find this brightness or newness you found, so I migrate from one house to the next. Somehow you find me, and I think I feel a little bit of that brightness you found. Lorraine's throwing a party, you say, and hand me an invitation. I invite you inside. You back away. Sorry, Lorraine's waiting. We survive on disappointments. I find a dress in someone's basement that fits and heels that I hope I can walk in. Your house is somehow crowded by the time I arrive. Lorraine is wearing a pink tutu over a red leather catsuit, and she's surrounded by other mannequins I recognize from various department stores and sex shops. Even the one from the auto body shop is here. I make my way over to him and try to start a conversation, but he doesn't respond. So I lean against him and imagine our lives together. We survive on possibilities. My husband, the mannequin from the auto body shop, would address me as his partner instead of wife. He would take my last name, never comment on my age, how many pills I take, the diapers I'll eventually need. He'd hold my hand, kiss me often, and tell me how much he loves me. He'd tell me he loves me so often that I forget about the party, Lorraine, and you asking Lorraine to marry you. We survive on the promise of the future. You invite me to the wedding, and I come. Lorraine wears a white pantsuit, and you a wedding gown. The mannequin from the auto body shop is there, but he sits far away from me. You whisper your vows, kiss Lorraine, and announce that you are now Mr. Lorraine. You thank everyone for coming. You thank me for coming. I have a few drinks and make my way to the backyard. You find me like you always do and ask if you can have a taste. We survive on missed opportunities. You ask why I tell you I don't know. That's a lie, but you've had one too many, and this conversation seems inappropriate on your wedding night. I tell you I'm leaving, and you tell me you know. You say you've noticed all the times I've moved, each time farther away from you. How I flirted with the guy from the auto body shop only to now pretend he doesn't exist. I tell you I think you're beautiful, handsome, that I don't know which you would prefer. I guess that's why I press my finger to your lips. You're crying, which shouldn't be happening. I look for Lorraine. You grab my hand, and I know if you asked me to stay, my answer would destroy everything.
I'm like truly speechless. I love
Speculative flash fiction.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Okay, thank you so much for reading that. What a great opener. Okay, before we continue, can you please introduce yourself to again to our listeners? This is the first time we've had a speculative flash fiction reading on the
Mhm.
podcast. So, yeah, share a little bit about yourself and your projects.
Yes, I'm Avitus B. Carle, and this is my debut flash fiction collection.
Sorry.
It might not pop up. That's fine. I'll send the link. My debut flash fiction collection, These Warm Bodies, which has a little bit of everything, including speculative flash fiction. I mostly write flash fiction. I also dabble in microfiction, which is super short flash fiction, but we'll get into that. And also nonfiction. I write flash nonfiction and also sometimes short stories. And yeah, that's a little about me.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for, first of all, reaching out with this particular topic idea. This is exciting for me because I'm in the novel writing length world, and
Mhm.
I have read collections of short stories before. I was curious about the flash fiction, the microfiction, and these are all things we're going to kind of unpack as we go. But I guess, what do you think about when you're starting to work on a story? How does the plotting work? What do you think about when you start to put your first thoughts together?
So when writing flash, I don't have the time to do the large three act structure that you see in novels,
Hmm.
where I like have to build the setting and then get into, oh, here's the start of the hero's journey, and then here's the midpoint where things start happening, and then we get the climax and then the resolution. Flash fiction
Hmm.
is anywhere from basically you have the micro, which can be as short as 50 words to 100 words, or sometimes it's even as long as 400 words, long as 400 words. And then flash fiction would be 500 to 1,000 words. And in those 500 to 1,000 words, I don't have time to build the setting. The setting might take up those 1,000 words. So I
Hmm.
really have to plant the reader in the situation that they are semi-familiar with. And so, for example, in How We Survive, we're in the apocalypse, and we each have our own idea of what happens during the apocalypse. I don't go into what caused this apocalypse because that would be a whole different story. But for flash fiction, we're more about in the moment. So in the moment, it's not about how this apocalypse happened. It's more about this deteriorating relationship and how one character is coping with moving on, as clearly the other character has moved on with a mannequin.
Yes.
Basically dealing with that problem. And so I can take off from there, seeing the setting is the apocalypse, something familiar, but then not familiar, because then we're having these characters. One is bonding with the mannequin, which is something completely different, and another is navigating that.
I love how you take very vivid circumstances of absurdity to really drive a point. And I think that that is remarkable. And that's why I love the speculative aspect of writing fiction like this, because like you said, you're diving into what each person's individual bias or perspective is of the setting. And then
Mhm.
you're introducing a concept that we all have to be able to understand quickly, right? A mannequin.
Yes.
But you can easily in your mind, you can compare that to a relatable feeling. Like, it doesn't have to be a mannequin, to really truly understand that feeling. But given the circumstances they're in, there's no other people. It has to be a
Right.
mannequin.
Yeah. Also wanted that weird aspect. I read a lot of weird experimental flash fiction, and also in the collection, there's another one about a deteriorating relationship, but instead, her husband is wanting to be the last cardboard cutout at the Blockbuster. And so instead of being the last people on Earth, they're not, but instead, it's this husband trying to chase his dream about being a cardboard cutout, which is not typically what someone dreams about becoming. But for him, this is his dream, and she's either going to adapt to this new version of her husband or she's not. And it's basically an exploration of humanity,
So,
but with a weird backdrop.
so that is ultimately every time you think of a new fiction to write, flash fiction,
Mhm.
you're creating a social commentary on something, or you're
Mhm.
trying to make a point about something, but you have to do it so succinctly.
Yes.
And how and please educate me. I know through like the novel writing world that there's agents want certain things and people want certain things. Is it the same for shorter fictions?
So I've had a lot of agents say that short story collections don't sell. And then since flash fiction is still this new kind of like underground form of writing, it's not really taught in the classroom unless it's like an elective or it's like a one time or it's included within the short story lesson. So a lot of agents don't really know yet how to sell flash fiction, especially since it's under the umbrella of short stories, which they already believe do not sell anyway. And
Hmm.
so if you're seeking to get flash fiction published, then you really go the more indie publisher route. And indie publishers are looking for things, as always, that stand out. And flash fiction already stands out. So you have a lot of indie publishers that are looking for either the flash fiction collection or like a flash short story mix collection. And then also we have the nonfiction flash fiction collections or the hybrid collections, which have a combination of things. But flash fiction basically is doing a lot of the work a short story is doing just in a shorter space. So you can have stories like I have about breakups, you have them about discovering yourself, you have them about speculative, where it's just in a shorter space. So you're forced to really focus on the one moment that's happening in that part of the story.
It's wild to me that there's this general conception that like traditional publishers or agents don't think that short stories or flash fiction sells well, when I feel like in other aspects of our life, the shorter the better, especially with
Yes.
social media and TikTok, the shorter attention spans get straight to the point.
And
Um,
that's what we were saying. It's like when you're on the train on the way to work, you don't necessarily have time to read the novel and then just drop it as soon as you get to work, because then by the time you're done with the workday, you forgot about what you just read. But with flash
mhm.
fiction and especially microfiction, because it's so short, you can just pull it up on your phone and then during your train ride, not your car ride, don't do that. Don't read while driving. That's a terrible idea. On the train, let's say with the train, or like even during a flight, you can pull it up and just read it, and it's quick. You can absorb the information and it stays with you. And that's the real pull of flash fiction, is that we're still creating stories that resonate with readers. It's just in a smaller space.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing the appeal of that myself right now. I'm reading a collection of short stories called Portal Mania, which is the authors, and I'm blanking. I'm so sorry. I'm blanking on her name right now. But these stories are all previously previously published in magazines or papers, which may not have the same, distribution as, the bookstores may, but it really speaks to how we consume stories forever. If you look at old school newspapers in the olden days, you got little pockets of stories all the time, just exactly that, so people can consume it as easily as they do their morning news. What got you into writing flash fiction?
So I went to a low residency MFA program, which is basically I go there or I went there for 10 days and then I came back home and I was able to write basically creative writing. So write short stories that I would then submit to my mentor for that semester, along with essays for the books I was reading. And then after that period was up for the semester, I would go back for 10 days. And then I could go back home after those 10 days were up and just continue the packet process. And at my MFA program, I went to the Naslin Mann School of Creative Writing in Kentucky. During that program, we had an elective period where for that semester they had a list of different electives that we could take, and one of them was flash fiction with K.L. Cook and Robin Lippincott. And I was just drawn to it. I was like, I have never heard of flash fiction. And I'm curious to see this new form of fiction because I heard of novels and then you have novelettes and then you have short stories. And I was like, there's an even shorter form outside of short stories. So it was basically curiosity that led me to take the course. So I took that course and I just fell in love with the form. I loved flash fiction. And then I started diving in online, like who is writing flash fiction that I can learn from. And that's how I found authors like Kathy Fish and Tommy Dean and Tara Campbell, who also writes a lot of speculative fiction. And just I just went down the rabbit hole, and that's how I found flash fiction.
I love it. What trends are you seeing in flash fiction? What are we likely to see?
You're likely to find flash fiction writers and flash nonfiction writers are all about experimentation and play.
Okay.
So we're all about trying new things. We borrow forms from poets and we'll end up using them in our flash. I have stories in my collection where I have Vagabond Mannequin, which is a story in the form of a crossword puzzle. Kim McGowan has one in the form of Mad Lib, which is, I think it's called Mad Libs. Forgive me, Kim McGowan, if I got the title wrong, but it's in the form of a Mad Lib. So there's a lot of room for experimentation along with the short form, but also we're just covering the same topics that a lot of short story writers are covering. So the genre that you can think of for a short story and a novel, you'll also find in flash fiction. There's romance, there's speculative, there's sci-fi, there's fantasy. There are entire literary magazines dedicated to fairy tale flash, like Fairy Tale Review specializes in flash fiction and short stories, I believe short stories that are basically retellings of fairy tales. So it's all about expanding the forms and exploring the different genres and experimenting just with shorter word limits.
How long does it take you to draft one flash fiction?
I have to, when I'm have a new story idea for Flash, I have to get it down in one sitting or else it'll be gone. Now, that gives the illusion that I'm constantly writing Flash if I can do it in one sitting, but absolutely not, because the ideas don't always come. And so that's why it's more important for me to get the idea down once it does arrive. And then to edit flash fiction is also a process. I'm not a writer that is pro editing. I love the new story smell. And I tend to put off editing until like I'm ready to sit down and really get to the make sure the word count is there, make sure every word is necessary. And sometimes it's more about making sure the structure or form is appropriate for the story and trying to get it to all come together. So it really depends.
The idea of sitting down and getting it all out in one sitting is so appealing to me. I'm currently just past the midpoint of my current work in progress, and I'm forgetting the things that I wrote 3, 4 months ago. And I know if I go back and I start to spiral, because the whole rule of don't edit yet until you get your messy
Yep.
first draft. So I'm just like, no, just keep looking forward, and I use brackets and all that like notes. And I'm like, check the color of his eyes and what was this guy's name again? It's just super appealing to me for memory reasons to be able to have it all down. That's why when people who write children's books, I'm also like, is it easier to write it down in one setting? Like picture books, I should say specifically. And am I just making things harder for myself, right? Trying to write novels. But no, that's amazing. I love that.
And I think that's also the appeal of flash fiction workshops or flash workshops is that when you have a workshop, you, especially in Flash, they give you a prompt. And then when I'm teaching Flash workshops online, especially, I give the class either 5 to 10 minutes to write the Flash. And that really forces them to get words on the page. And they don't have time to edit. They just have that 5 to 10 minutes to write. And it's just in that moment. I have teach a lot of like maybe an hour Flash course, hour and a half. And during that hour and a half, you just have that time that I give you. And normally I try to squeeze three prompts into that hour to an hour and a half. So you're coming out with three new mini short stories in that workshop. So it really does help to just get it all down in that moment.
Give us an example of your prompts.
Oh, so one prompt. I love a nameless narrator or nameless character. So instead of taking a character named Bob, and they say Bob walked down the street, you would say the trash collector walked down the street. So already we have the job title associated with this character, and it's in motion. So the trash collector walked down the street. So clearly we're having this image set up where it's not just a person, he's a trash collector. And this could be he collects trash professionally, like he is the garbage man, or he's just this guy that just walks around and collects
Yeah.
trash.
Or
And what I
souls.
love with these, yes, when we get these prompts and when we think about how to transform characters, we're forced to think in a different way. And of course, that might not work so well for a novel where you just have the trash collector over and over again. But in, like I said, the shorter space, it works and it often helps because also we don't need the whole backstory of this trash collector. We already are grounded in this moment that he is a trash collector.
I love that. I love it when people use familiar terms like that in fantastical settings
Hmm.
because it immediately helps me go like feel that sense of grounding that you mentioned and I'm like, "Oh, okay. Now this feels relatable. This isn't so like high in the sky, sci-fi, for example. Like if
Right.
if you were to say the trash collector roamed the surface of Mars, I'd be
Hmm.
like, "Oh yeah, okay. I don't know how he got there, but I know what he does. We're good."
We're on Mars. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned already the differences between typical three-act plot structure for novels versus the more condensed form of flash fiction. What advice do you give to writers who are just starting flash fiction and it's time, like, is there an outline? Is it good to start with an outline? How do they begin?
For flash fiction, I don't find outlines helpful, especially if you're writing micro. If you're writing a micro, which is maybe anywhere between 50 to 100 words, an outline would just be the micro. And for
Okay.
flash fiction, to outline basically 4 pages double space would also be the story. So it's easier for me in my personal writing style to just dive into the story, chase the idea, because you can, like I said, always go back and edit it and make sure it fits into the word count. And sometimes there are even places when you're looking to submit flash that will say flash fiction can be up to 1,500 words. So it's really up to the submission guidelines. But for the short form, outlining, I would think would just turn out to just be the story.
Okay. And so for a writer, is it just I have a character and they need to have some sort of motive or stakes and they have to reach some sort of ending? Is that kind of what you're trying to accomplish?
But it depends. So I'm
Okay.
very character based in my writing. Normally, my characters reveal themselves first to me, and then I chase them. Like for in How We Survive, Lorraine, the two people in the apocalypse were the first ones to pop out. I just needed to give them the whole story. A lot of Flash can just be about the setting, and it's events happening like in a town. So sometimes it's more setting based. Sometimes it's more plot based, where we're constantly in motion throughout the Flash fiction piece. So, like I said, it really depends on the story. Sometimes it depends on the writer if they're more setting based, plot based, character based. So
Okay.
there's a lot of different ways you can approach flash fiction. And my advice for writers that are interested in trying flash fiction is just to be open to it, just be open to the ideas that come.
I find when reading shorter fiction, and like I mentioned, I'm reading Portal Mania right now. Portal Mania, real quick, is a collection of short stories that kind of re-examine regular life through speculative lenses. And one example is, okay, take the very real life issue of kidnappers, like taking children, right, from parks, being worried about the ice cream truck, all that stuff. But what the way they she presented it in the first short story is that portals keep opening up around town and people keep disappearing through them. And so if you take her literally, you're like, whoa, portals, where are they going? But then you pay attention to the context and the tone of the story, and you realize, no, portals represents kidnappers and the
Mhm.
very real experiences that people go through. And so when you're reading this, you're kind of like, okay, how does this end? And like, what is the point? I'm like, you're really intrigued by the entire premise and it's got to lead somewhere, right? And what I'm
Mhm.
finding is that a lot of the times the endings, like they're super important. Many times I read, they're very nebulous. They're open-ended. They want you to think about, like, take your own unique thing away from it. And after I finish a story, I'm Googling it. I'm like, what was that supposed to mean? So what do you think about endings? And do you like them nebulous or a satisfying conclusion?
I love an open ending.
Okay.
I love not getting all the details about what happens next. A lot of times in Flash, you won't get the details of what happens next, or it won't be like, period, that's the end. It'll be more open-ended because, like I said, short form, you have to get the story down, and sometimes that story doesn't have an ending. Now, that's not to say Flash fiction doesn't have sometimes a firm, complete ending of the story, but I am someone that loves open-ended. I also love when readers can interpret what might be the meaning of the story or what might happen to the characters because it makes an interesting conversation.
Has anyone ever given you feedback about a story where their interpretation was completely surprising to you?
Not completely surprising, but I've had mixed. I have one story is in this story, in the story. Let me think. Um, it's one about a rabbit. It's about identity, and it's a rabbit who says she is a fox. And I've had maybe one person tell me, "Oh my God, is this story really about identity?" And she's like, clearly she is a rabbit, but she identifies as a fox. And I was like, you got it. A lot of people just see, oh, it's a rabbit pretending to be a fox. Okay, that's cool. No, I had one person come to me and was like, this is a story about her, and she knows that inside she is a fox, and that's it.
Oh, fascinating. I love that. So, would you say a large part of the story writing experience for you is hearing that feedback and that interpretation from readers?
I love readers approaching me with interpretations of my stories, and I find it so funny, especially when I read the more like reactive stories. Like How We Survive is definitely one of those more reactive stories because Lorraine is so creepy and
Yeah.
everyone loves her. And I love those moments when I'm reading and I look up and I see people like, oh my God, it's a man. The person is a mannequin, or it's like, oh my God, a cardboard cutout. Like, what? And those are the moments that I treasure most about the writing experience, especially while reading out loud and sharing my work. And then on social media as well, people will comment, it's like, I can't believe Lorraine is in the doorway. And first of all,
Yes.
she's a mannequin. Like, how did she get there?
That creeped me out. I just picture this like
No,
mannequin.
she's just leaning in the doorway.
Oh my God. And so vivid and so effective with so little words. That's really powerful. I it's what I find refreshing about it is when I was in high school and you read some of the older literature back in the days and it's very wordy, right? And I would get lost in a lot of the floral language and I'd lose track. I have ADHD, so many times I'd kind of get distracted halfway through. The Scarlet Letter is a really good example of a book that I kept getting lost
I
in.
was thinking of Charles Dickens, who
Ah,
literally got paid per word, and I'm just like, here we go with the snow, Charles. Like, I know you're trying to get paid, but there's only so
Oh,
many ways.
wait, oh, is that the reason? Wow. Okay. Well, I do appreciate the succinctness of a good, scary, like single sentence that really gets it very clear. There's a mannequin leaning in your doorway. Because when you first mentioned the doorway opening, I expected it to be her husband, and that it was Lorraine instead. I'm like, oh my gosh, that Lorraine. Can't trust that Lorraine.
She's back.
Okay, so for authors that are used to novel length stories like me, and they want to try flash fiction, maybe they take your course, what are some obstacles that they may face making the adjustment?
So the same, it's reverse for the flash writers. So what issues novel writers might find, flash fiction writers will find trying to write novels. And we talk about this all the time on social media, where we're just like, how on earth do we set up a story? How on earth do we have exposition? What is that? And we just try. So for novel writers, this is to say, cutting down might be one of the obstacles a novel writer might face because you're so determined to set everything up and build a backstory for the characters. Like when I write my characters, they don't have character charts. I don't know, oh, well, this character is from Milwaukee and she met this guy while walking through the apocalypse on a highway bridge and he came from Cleveland. No, I don't have time to explore their background. They just are here together and they're the last people on Earth versus a novel writer has all those charts or might have that outline that follows these characters maybe for years, maybe
Hmm.
for a few chapters. And for Flash, we don't do that. We're just with these characters, unless we're in a Flash series, which is another way to publish Flash, is that you have the same characters and they appear over multiple stories. And Kathy Ulrich is one of the Flash writers that does this really, really well. And Megan Phillips and Ruth Hofre is another one that does it really well, where they have a Flash series. So they have these characters that are the same characters, and they just appear in different stories, in
Mm,
different
okay.
Flash stories, going through different things. So, but for me, I'm like one and done Flash writer. Lorraine probably will pop up again because she's such a memorable character.
Yes.
But a lot of my other characters are just like, this is their story right here, and that's it. So I don't have their backstories ready. I don't have the full, complete location of where they are. I don't have a chart or a draft that has pictures to inspire me about, like, oh, they're from England. Here's pictures of England or the mountains of Ireland or anything like that. I just have the one story. So I think that might be something novel writers might struggle with, is shortening and fighting against those urges to build the backstories for everybody in their stories.
See, I relate to that because immediately I'm like, but what if I wrote a book, but as a series of short of flash
Mhm.
fiction? You know what I mean? So you're accomplishing the end goal of a novel, but just in little bite-sized pieces as you go
Yep.
along the way. So you can do that world building, but it has to exist within its little microcosm as you go. It would be
Mhm.
funny if you did Lorraine as the uniting character of like a multiverse, you know, of one
He
book.
just appears in doorways and you wake up, you're like, oh God, it's my turn.
Oh no, Lorraine's coming for my man.
Oh, here we go.
All right. What is the best way to get in front of audiences as a flash fiction author? Is it anthologies? Is it websites? Is it magazines? What do you do?
So for publishing, I find it best to publish online. That way, I love publishing online. And so there's no paywall. Most of the magazines that accept flash fiction do not have a paywall. So you do not have to pay in order to read the story. You just click on the link and there's the story. And I find that it's really helpful, especially as more flash writers are sharing their work. Teachers are beginning to notice. So teachers
Mm.
are using their work to teach in their classrooms. And it's really helpful to have it free. So the students don't have to buy anything. They don't have to buy a subscription. They don't have to buy the whole journal. They just click the link. There's the story. They read it. They can study it. They can learn from it. And it's a way to share, keep sharing Flash around the world. And also, those Flash magazines nominate for anthologies. So, Flash, we have
Oh.
Best Small Fictions and we have Best Micro Fictions. Those are the two main print anthologies. And then there's also Best Non-Required Reading. don't know if they're still publishing that, but it's one of my favorites. I love Best Non-Required Reading. Highly recommend it. And then there's the Pushcart Prize, which is this fat anthology that is just packed with short stories and some flash fiction. And then the online ones, Wigleaf, which is an online literary magazine, has the Wigleaf Top 50, which all their editors are constantly reading throughout the year, all these different flash stories and poetry that gets published, and then they'll
Wow.
pick the best, and then they'll get a guest judge to pick the top 50, and they'll publish that toward the end of the year. And then also there's um oh, I'm forgetting the name. It's like, oh, Best of the Net. It's Sundress Publications Best of the Net. So they also have their editors throughout the year reading these flash stories that are popping up, and they'll pick, I think it's flash and poetry. They'll pick the best and publish their own online anthology. So if for flash writers that are also starting out, Best of the Net and Wigleaf Top 50, if you want online resources, are the best way to learn about flash because those are picked to the top, and then go out and buy best microfictions and best small fictions. And then there was the Norton Flash Fiction Anthology that was recently published, which also has a lot of excellent flash fiction in it.
Awesome. Excellent. You've gotten me so excited about this format. And for any of our listeners that are now interested and intrigued, definitely check out the resources. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've learned so much. And is there any final remarks or advice that you have?
Read flash fiction and flash nonfiction.
Awesome. I loved your story. And where can people find your work to read your stories?
Yes, you can find it on my website at avitusbcarle.com. And yeah, I'm basically at Avitus B. Carle everywhere on social media.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in with us today. Hope you learned something and were entertained and intrigued. And tune in next week for a new episode. All right. Thanks. Bye.